Hello, everyone. My name is Atienza. I'm a first-year PhD student in Global Studies at the University of California in Irvine. I'd like to thank the NCCA and the Cebu Studies Center, especially Dr. Hope, for organizing this conference and giving me the space to present my research. I met Dr. Hope at the Cebu Studies Center during my fieldwork in 2022, which was an important part of carrying out this research. I'm presenting today my paper titled Epistemological Excavations, Enduring Fixed Boundaries of Knowledge as Mining Violence in Cebu. My presentation will start with an introduction of mining in Cebu, followed with an overview of the noun-verb oriented paradigm. I will briefly discuss selected legal texts discussed in my paper. I then shift to a discussion about how the rule of law speaks a noun-oriented worldview into material reality. I will then finish with my conclusions. So the island province of Cebu is fraught with scenarios of mining violence. From the southeastern coastline to the mountains, communities in towns and cities like Toledo City, Naga City, San Fernando, and Sibonga have for decades faced mining-related contention in courts, on the streets, and more recently on social media. Many people involved in mining activism face libel suits from politicians and have faced harassment from armed persons. But when we think of mining violence in the Philippines, Cebu is not top of mind. In many places in the Philippines where mining companies operate, think of places like Palawan, Mindanao, or Benguet, mining violence includes a struggle involving indigenous people, military, police, New People's Army, who not just interact in a particular space, but they encounter each other in deadly clashes. In Cebu, mining violence does not fit clearly into this scenario. However, this doesn't mean that there isn't any deadly contention involving the mining industry in Cebu. At this stage, this image on my screen indicates there is opposition to mining, and it does involve people who protect their locality and experience violence within and outside the law. This photo shows signage against mining and was taken at a public hearing for a mining project in Sibonga in 2022. Take, for instance, approximately 80 people who died at a landslide in Naga City in 2018, and the 8,000 people who then became dispossessed and were evacuated to makeshift mining evacuation centers at schools and covered courts. Or the 4 people who died at another landslide in 2020, this time in Toledo City. In 2005, a labor organizer at Atlas Mining Corporation in Toledo City was ambushed and injured in Barangay Uling in Naga City. Even longer ago, in 1988, there was an attack on union leaders at the same company in Toledo. For around 30 years, residents of Sibonga have held their ground against mining companies, hoping to stop their operations. After public hearings in 2022 and 2023, the mining project proposed by Bayan Cement was approved. The precarity of the situation involving mining in Cebu can be understood in the Philippines' ranking as one of the deadliest places worldwide for land defenders. The mining sector is the deadliest for activists, lawyers, farmers, indigenous people, but also ordinary citizens. However, many incidents and deaths go unreported, and mining violence is more than the instances of physical harm and death reported. Research shows that holding corporations and the government accountable is often met with retaliation. Mining companies wield significant power and receive protection from the state through persuasion, propaganda, or, when necessary, raw force and police power to suppress opposition to neoliberalism. To date, the law has yet to hold those responsible for the violence against land defenders accountable. In my paper, I argue that mining violence can be understood through an epistemological lens before the first rock or minerals even extracted. The guiding question in this research focuses on the way that legal categories as fixed boundaries of knowledge contribute to mining violence and its invisibility in Cebu. Emerging during the Spanish colonial period, the political economy of mining is one that is dependent on dispossession, extraction, and accumulation. The account of the Spanish missionary Ignacio Francisco Alcina in 1668 shows that Visayan epistemologies were described as ridiculous, riddled with 1,000 absurdities. This indicates the centrality of imposing a new epistemology when the Spanish Empire invaded the archipelago. The Philippines' colonial legacy of Spanish and American occupation specifically has imposed a new epistemic order that has turned places of life into places of violence and dispossession. In terms of methodology, my research involves fieldwork and is qualitative in nature. I've carried out fieldwork over the past 5 years between 2018, 2022, and 2023, and most recently in August this year. During fieldwork, I've interviewed and spoken to mining affected residents and organizers. I've also attended public hearings and documented mining sites and towns. My primary material includes historical and contemporary legal text, legal documents, and other texts acquired at the Cebu City Hall of Justice, the National Archives of the Philippines, and other sources online, including government websites. My main methodological approach to the analysis of these texts is critical discourse analysis, or CDA. CDA is employed to understand how power dynamics and control are articulated through legal discourse, despite the often invisible nature of power. A noun-verb paradigm adds to what Portuguese sociologist Boaventura Sousa de Santos discusses as cognitive injustice, which is the historical and contemporary struggle between the global North and the global South, and the systematic erasure of systems of knowledge, or epistemologies. This he provokingly frames as the murder of knowledges. This epistemological erasure forms part of the workings and realities of institutions, government, rule of law, and daily life. Epistemologically, mining violence can be viewed through a noun-verb paradigm or worldview, where a noun-oriented paradigm dominates the rule of law and the political economy of mining. Theoretically, a noun-oriented worldview adheres to a positivist logic, which turns places experienced as complex living environments into nouns or static non-living objects. Places of generational connection and care for the land and family become sites of extraction even when contested. Mining tenements are an example of this. Here is seen image at a public hearing about a mining project in Cebu. The local government organized a public hearing where the mining company could present their project, while the residents could ask questions and voice concerns. Cebu, in this sense, is a place of life actively reimagined through a state bureaucracy as a commodity or an exploitable natural resource. In this sense, nouns are universalizing devices, creating the distinction between the living world and the lifeless one. A positivist interpretation of land or place as an object enables the state to exercise control through legislation and thereby determine who has and who doesn't have the right to access and profit from these lands. Given the commercial interest, epistemological complexity is politically undesirable and non-existent in the rule of law. A verb-oriented view fits within what Filipino scholar Lily S. Mendoza describes as human relations and other kinship relations with plants, animals, mountains, trees, rocks, and other beings in nature. It is a relational worldview. In this sense, complex places are complex living environments where residents live, have generational connection, and care for the land and for family. Look at this image or see this image of a vacant house, a neighborhood, next to a quarry in Naga City, where residents used to raise their families and raise their livestock. A verb-oriented worldview is an epistemology evident in everyday life, not necessarily one that is coded into the rule of law. In a letter written to the DNR, or the Department of Environment and Natural Resources, residents expressed their concern about a neighboring mining tenement that they argue should not be allowed to proceed. In this letter, the residents speak of a living world when they write that they are not only plain settlers of that area, but rather they are people who nurtured and cultivated the land for a long period of time. With the dominance of the noun paradigm, as I just mentioned, the Visayan epistemology is considered lifeless and removed from its mountains and oceans that carry histories and stories. A political economy of mining that requires the exploitation of the land is dependent on an absence of a verb-oriented Visayan epistemology. In my paper, I analyzed 9 legal texts to demonstrate how a noun-oriented worldview dominates the Philippine rule of law, showing how the Regalian Doctrine of 1521 persists beyond occupation under the Spanish and American empires. So three legal texts are shown in this table for the purpose of this presentation. When the Spanish Empire invaded the Philippines, it declared the Regalian Doctrine of 1521, which was rooted in the Vatican's 1452 Papa Bull, or also known as the Doctrine of Discovery. This doctrine authorized European monarchs to invade, vanquish, subdue, and to take away all the possessions and property of pagans and non-Christians. It represents a Western legal concept first introduced by the Spaniards, stipulating state ownership over conquered territories, and underpins subsequent mining laws in the Philippines. The Spanish law of 1867 shows an early example of land ownership, mining rights, and exportation. It provides the legal language of commodification, specifically apparent in Articles 76 and 81, with provisions on taxations or mining claims. The American period is characterized by monopolistic capitalism with the start of large-scale coal production in Cebu. The Mining Act of 1936 established a lease contract system for mineral land management. It reinforced state ownership of minerals and land and allowed qualified citizens and corporations to prospect, locate mining claims, and acquire leases under its provisions. The Spanish and American colonial periods showed two ideological foundations. Spanish rule is characterized by a religious zeal to convert indigenous peoples while also enforcing the archipelago's property regime. American rule is characterized in modern liberalism alongside notions of Christian supremacy. The Philippine Mining Act, therefore, of 1995 further institutionalized bureaucratic procedures for the exploration, development, utilization, and conservation of natural resources. It prescribes rights of contractors, owners, occupants, or concessionaires with commercial interest. The Mining Act of 1995 liberalized foreign investment by allowing significant foreign ownership of mining operations. The overview of legal text shows a legal lineage that adheres to a positivist extractive logic that transforms land into a commodity and into state-owned commodities subject to exploitation. These mining laws use an extractive language apparent in sections describing land as mineral deposits, natural resources, and mineral lands belonging to the state and open to exploitation by the state, individual, or corporate entities. A bureaucratic process has also emerged to facilitate this process of commodification, simplifying land-based social relations that are otherwise too complex for state administration. In the words of Boaventura Sousa de Santos, epistemologically speaking, what is actively produced as non-existent is made absent in the judiciary. Therefore, it turns places of life into places of extraction and views the world through a noun-oriented lens. Fixed boundaries of knowledge function as imagined borders, established through legal texts and processes, which turn those imagined boundaries into material reality. In thinking of resource frontiers as an imaginative project capable of molding both places and processes, we should not ignore how these resources are traumatically produced. Look, for example, at this document from a session of the legislative body in Cebu, which shows the approval of a new mining project. The documentation turns the imagined borders of the state or imagined borders of the frontier into a new reality. To summarize, I have discussed the dominance of a noun-oriented worldview to show its prevalence in enduring fixed boundaries of knowledge in the Philippine rule of law. This shows how a legacy of a colonial legal framework renders mining-related violence invisible in Cebu. An epistemological framing of mining violence elucidates that the rule of law's noun-oriented paradigm leaves out a local, relational, verb-oriented Visayan worldview characterized by generational connection and care for land or for place. The judiciary's dismissal of dissent and the construction of state narratives within fixed boundaries of knowledge contribute to an imposed reality that marginalizes opposition and facilitates continued exploitation. Consequently, given the power and dominance of mining companies and their projects, legal and political frameworks are shown to favor the interests of the political and corporate elites at the expense of local communities, which explains why their struggles are dismissed. In this presentation, I've provided my references on the last pages, and I'm happy to share this with everyone. If not, it's also available in my paper submitted to this conference. I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have in our discussion section.